Dave's coming in too.
Oh, okay.
And you're live.
Thank you. Hello, Dave. You're muted, but that's fine. We're
Yeah,
just starting. We're
Running
just starting now,
a technical problem.
right?
Thank you, Katie.
You and a couple of other people, so we're all set now, though. Is Lily Ritchie supposed to be in?
I was hoping she may be having the same problem I was, which is too complicated to explain, but I'm going to text her, but we should go ahead anyway.
Okay. All right. I want to call to order the meeting of the Nantucket Memorial Airport Commission for October 13, 2020. As a preliminary matter, I'm Dan Drake, Chairman of the Nantucket Airport Commission. Permit me to confirm that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present and can hear me. Members of the commission, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. And Arthur Gasparo?
Here.
Jeanette Topham? No, I'm sorry, Jeanette's not here, excuse me. Tony Buscarin?
Here.
Andrea Planzer?
Here.
Airport staff, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Manager Tom Rafter?
Here.
Assistant Manager Noah Carberg?
Here.
Lily Sylvia?
Here.
Katie Perales?
Here.
Anticipated speakers on the agenda, please respond in the affirmative. Robert Walsh?
Here.
Kevin Kane of Sulloway and Hollis, PLLC.
Here.
Dave Mackey of Anderson and Krieger.
Here.
And Mr. Mackey's associate, Lily Ritchie, may be joining us. Good afternoon. This open meeting of the Nantucket Memorial Airport Commission is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12, 2020, due to the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth due to the outbreak of the COVID-19 virus. In order to mitigate the transmission of the COVID-19 virus, we've been advised and directed by the Commonwealth to suspend public gatherings. And as such, the governor's order suspends the requirement of the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. Further, all members of public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. The order, which you can find posted with agenda materials for this meeting, allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely, so long as reasonable public access is afforded so that the public can follow along with the deliberations of the meeting. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting will feature public comment towards the end. For this meeting, the Nantucket Memorial Airport Commission is convening by video conference via the Zoom app and broadcasting on the Town of Nantucket YouTube channel. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and that all attendees are participating by video conference. Accordingly, please be aware that other folks may be able to see you and to take care not to screen share your computer. Anything that you broadcast may be captured by the recording. All supporting materials for the meeting have been provided to members of this body are available on the town's website unless otherwise noted. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda unless I note otherwise. Before we turn to the first item on the agenda, permit me to cover some ground rules for effective and clear conduct of our business and to ensure accurate meeting minutes. I will introduce each speaker on the agenda. After they conclude their remarks, the chair will go down the line of members, inviting each by name to provide any comment, questions, or motions. Please hold until your name is called. Further, please remember to mute your phones or computers when you are not speaking. Please remember to speak clearly and in a way that helps generate accurate minutes. For any response, please wait until the chair yields the floor to you and state your name before speaking. If members wish to engage in a conversation with other members, please do so through the chair, taking care to identify yourself. For items with public comment, after members have spoken, the chair will afford public comment as follows. NCTV will activate the chat feature on YouTube. Members of the public who have comments or questions can use this feature to communicate with the public body. Instructions are on the town website. It is important to know to note that once the chat feature is activated, members of the public will need to refresh their YouTube webpage in order to access that chat. I will notify you when the chat is being activated. It is important to note that once the chat feeder, oh, I'm sorry, I read that already. The chair and our staff will do their best to address the question and comments. Finally, each vote taken in this meeting will be conducted by roll call vote. Moving on to the agenda. As I noted, this meeting is being both video and audio recorded. Commissioner Topham is unable to be present. The first item is for the members of the commission to raise any comments they may have on the agenda. Are there any such comments?
No.
Hearing none, seeing none, the agenda is adopted. Are there any additions or corrections to the minutes of the September 8th, 2020 draft minutes? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve those minutes?
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. How do you vote, Ms. Planzer?
Aye.
Mr. Buscarin?
Aye.
Mr. Gasparo?
Aye.
And the chair votes aye. We have executive session minutes, which have been approved by the commission in executive session for release. They are enumerated here. I'll read them off. And then I will ask for a vote to approve those minutes collectively and to release them. They are minutes of executive sessions held on February 25th, 2014, April 14th, 2015, May 12, 2015, January 10, 2017, June 13, 2017, July 11th, 2017, August 8th, 2017, September 12th, 2017, October 10th, 2017, November 14th, 2017, December 12th, 2017, January 9th, 2018, and February 13th, 2018. Is there a motion to approve those minutes and to release them?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Buscarin. Second?
I'll second.
Thank you. How do you vote, Ms. Planter?
Aye.
Mr. Buscarin?
Aye.
Mr. Gasparo?
Aye.
And the chair votes aye. May I have a motion, please, to ratify the warrants of September 9th, 2020, September 23rd, 2020, and October 7th, 2020.
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor? I'm sorry. How do you vote, Ms. Planzer?
Aye.
How do you vote, Mr. Buscarin?
Aye.
Mr. Gasparo?
Aye.
The chair votes aye. All right. The next matter on the agenda is the request of Robert Walsh to reconsider the July 2nd, 2019 notice of restriction issued by airport management and confirmed by the commission. Before we get into the discussion, I would like to say that we will allow Mr. Walsh and his attorney to speak, hopefully briefly, to present his case. He has, the council has submitted, Mr. Kane has submitted material to submit into the record of the meeting, which we will do. And then actually, Mr. Rafter is going to start off, I'm sorry. And then Mr. Walsh and Mr. Kane, and then Mr. Rafter again with his recommendation. We are not going to discuss this matter in public session because it is subject to litigation. It is subject to a proceeding in front of the FAA. We will take it up in executive session, and at the end of our discussion, because normally it would take some time to get the news out, but at the end of our discussion tonight, what I'm going to do is ask the commission's permission to release to have Mr. Mackey call Mr. Kane and tell him the outcome of our deliberations. So that will probably be tomorrow morning. Mr. Rafter, do you want to open it up?
Sure. As you may recall, Commissioners, I sent Mr. Walsh a notice of restriction on July 2nd, 2019 for various reasons, including misuse of access credentials, failure to attend a disabled aircraft, disorderly behavior, and non-payment of fees. Subsequently, I sent Mr. Walsh a letter on August 25th of this year, providing additional information regarding the FAA order of revocation of the air carrier certificate for Nantucket Express, which was owned and operated by Mr. Walsh. This order refers to 3 different types of FAA violations: flying of an aircraft not listed on the operation spec, pilots flying without having passed a written test or check ride, and flying aircraft that on many occasions had not had its annual or 100-hour inspection. Additionally, in your packet is the informal Part 13 complaint that Mr. Walsh filed with the FAA, as well as various supporting documents. We're currently awaiting the outcome of that, but based on this additional information, I would ask to continue the restriction of Mr. Walsh from using the airport for at least 1 more year.
Mr. Kane, the floor is yours. Please unmute yourself.
Sorry about that. I really should know better. I apologize for that. Again, for those of you who have not heard my introduction, my name is Kevin Kane. I'm a lawyer with Sulloway and Hollis in our Needham office. Again, thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak with all of you this evening. I represent Robert Thomas Walsh and will be speaking on his behalf this evening. I have, as an initial matter, I'll describe for you what I submitted as part of the record and explain why I did so. I submitted, first of all, Mr. Walsh's pilot certificate, his medical certificate, and evidence of his most recent successful biennial flight review. The FAA pilot certificate confirms that my client has the highest rating possible, which is the airline transport pilot rating under certificate number 1685087. He currently holds a valid 2nd class medical certificate issued on August 12, 2020. That will last a year, and the control number there is 2000009 or 216766, and it was issued by Aviation Medical Examiner James Ross, MD. He passed his biennial flight review with flight instructor Charlie Rockwell. His CFI certificate is number 3727311. That was conducted on October 5th, 2019. Together, what these 3 documents allow Mr. Walsh to do is to pilot an aircraft anywhere in the continental United States and its territories, and it permits Mr. Walsh to take off and land at any public airport within the United States, and that includes Logan, LAX, O'Hare, JFK, LaGuardia, any airport that accepts public air or is open to the public. Indeed, I would say that despite your ramp restrictions at Nantucket, Mr. Walsh would be well within his rights as a licensed pilot to do touch and goes all day long at Nantucket, and you'd be powerless to prevent him from doing so. Now, I'll get back to why that's relevant as to the reasons for the restriction. But I've also, for the record, because this is in litigation, I've introduced the airline transport pilot privileges section of the FARs, which is 14 CFR 61-167. As I say, this is the highest possible FAA rating that a pilot can obtain. I've also submitted the flight review section of the FARs, and I submitted the actuarial life table for basically 2 reasons. One, there's an old adage in flying that there are old pilots and bold pilots, but there are no old, bold pilots. Mr. Walsh is 75 years old, and he's still walking this planet. And that's the best evidence that he is a safe pilot. He has over 40,000 hours in the air. That translates into over 4.5 years of his life have been unmoored to the planet. He is probably the record holder for most takeoffs and landings in Nantucket, although I have represented another fellow who might possibly debate that. But he has had tens of thousands of successful takeoffs and landings in Nantucket. He is infinitely safer than many of the other pilots that I've represented in my career, and he is a whole lot safer than I am. But I would be allowed to land in Nantucket and park on your ramp. His age is also relevant when you consider the sanctions that you have imposed. Mr. Walsh does not have an infinite amount of time left in his life to operate an aircraft. He owns property on Nantucket, has spent much of his life traveling to and from Nantucket, and not being able to fly his private aircraft and tie it down in Nantucket is a great inconvenience. Excuse me. The other document that, one of the other documents that I have introduced into the record is the airport sponsor assurance, most recent published assurances of February 2020. I acknowledge this may not be the grant assurances under which you are currently bound, but it's certainly representative of the assurances that all airports must provide to the flying public. And again, this is really for the benefit of the courts and the litigation. I've also introduced into the record the Town of Nantucket Chapter 203 airport regulations, including Appendix A. I submitted that for two reasons: to complete the record and also to emphasize that there is no sanction guidance whatsoever in those regulations. Similarly, the last document that I've introduced is the airport rules and regulations, again, to complete the record, but also primarily to show that there's no sanction guidance. The arguments or explanations for the various events that have been listed as justification for the restrictions, those explanations have been previously provided to the commission by Mr. Walsh and his predecessor counsel, so I will not reiterate those. But with respect to the recently added order of revocation for the air carrier certificate, that relates to the company's, or Mr. Walsh's company's privileges, and not to Mr. Walsh's privileges as a pilot. I understand that Mr. Walsh voluntarily surrendered that certificate. I also understand that the events that were complained about and listed in the FAA's notice of revocation happened in 2015, 2016, and 2017. These are events that obviously are not going to repeat themselves because Nantucket Express no longer exists, and the agreement with Nantucket or with the commission or the airport expired long ago. My personal feeling on this, and as the advocate for my client, is that Mr. Walsh has served his time. The FAA, when the FAA revokes a pilot's license, they generally revoke it for a period of time. In my experience, 30 years of doing this, a revocation, which is the worst thing the FAA can do, other than a lifetime revocation, which is very, very rare. It's usually 1 year to 2 years max, and then they retest. That's the worst that the FAA will ever do to you. What you've done to Mr. Walsh in prohibiting him from flying his aircraft to an island on which he has a home, I would suggest is a very severe sanction, and one that is not guided by any written sanction guidance that I can find anywhere. It's entirely up to you as a body to decide the nature and extent of the punishment. There has been some suggestion in the arguments made in the past that the arguments in court will relate to the arbitrary and capricious nature of why the restrictions were put in place. My principal argument, if this proceeds to further litigation, is that the punishment is arbitrary and capricious because there is no guidance. There is no statute reference or et cetera anywhere that I can find that indicates what the punishment will be if you violate a particular section of your own rules and regulations. So I believe that there is no credible evidence that Mr. Walsh presents a safety concern operating a aircraft in Nantucket. Certainly, if there was a safety concern, the FAA would revoke his license. The FAA has not done so. He's legal to fly, as I say, anywhere in the country and into very busy airspace. But he's prevented from going to Nantucket because of events that happened literally years ago. So I would ask that you seriously reconsider the restrictions and that you permit Mr. Walsh to come back and land his airplane and park it on the ramp as any visitor to the island would be allowed to do. I thank you very much for your time. And if you have any questions of me or of Mr. Walsh, we're certainly happy to answer them if we can. You're muted.
I'll open it up to questions in just a moment, but I want to just verify one thing you said. You said he'd surrendered his operating certificate. My understanding is that while he surrendered the state license, if you will, for Nantucket Express, he never surrendered the operating certificate to the FAA. Is that correct?
I don't believe that's correct at all, but Mr. Walsh can answer that directly if he's got his if he's not muted.
Yes, no, I surrendered my certificate in January of 2018. I surrendered my airline operating certificate, January 9th, 2018.
Okay, thank you. I was misinformed. Are there any questions by any of the other commissioners? Mr. Buscarin, any questions?
I have no questions.
Ms. Planzer? Mr. Gasparo?
No.
I guess the one thing that troubles me, and I would appreciate your commenting on, you said, and I respect it, that Mr. Walsh has flown for many hours, thousands of hours, without an accident. But our concern in this matter has been with the safety issues at the airport and the safety. Obviously, we need to be concerned about the safety of the people who fly from here. And some of the issues that were raised by the FAA in their concern involved other people flying Mr. Walsh's planes. And I would like to ask you, Mr. Kane, why this should not be of concern to us in this matter.
Well,
because they presumably happened with Mr. Walsh's at least general knowledge.
If you're referring to the, we're talking about the revocation of the certificate.
Correct. That's correct.
Well, that's not going to happen anymore because that entity doesn't exist anymore. That business doesn't exist anymore. What we're talking about now is Mr. Walsh wanting to fly his own personal aircraft to and from the island. That's what's left of his.
I'm sorry. Excuse me. Go ahead. Finish.
I would suggest that that's what's left of his aviation life, if you will. I'm going to leave the word career out because it's no longer a commercial endeavor. It's just transportation.
But why shouldn't we assume that those incidents which happened were under his control when they happened aren't indicative of a general disregard for safety issues?
Well, and I'm not trying to deflect, but I believe it's for the FAA to decide whether or not he's a safe pilot. The FAA has decided that he's a safe pilot. They have not taken any certificate action whatsoever, and they have the same knowledge of these facts that you have. And it's the FAA that licenses pilots, that requires pilots to do their biennial flight reviews, that requires pilots to have medical exams. That's the FAA's job. If you're not a safe pilot, the FAA takes your license away. So the FAA has determined that it's safe for him to land at Logan. So if he's safe to land at Logan, I would suggest he's safe to land at Nantucket, even though I will acknowledge that in July, perhaps July 4th, you get more takeoff and landings in Nantucket than you do at Logan. I always thought that was a great statistic.
I would also like to point out for the record again, that when we first heard Mr. Walsh and his prior attorney in July of 2019, we offered to him the opportunity to come back in 6 months and talk to us again about the decision. He did not do that. The occasion, as I believe it to be the case for this meeting, is the fact that that Mr. Mackey came to you and said that we have this letter from the FAA and we're going to share it with the commission. And would Mr. Walsh like to come and be heard on the subject? And my understanding is that the response, whether it was immediate or not, I don't know, but the response was yes, and it was originally scheduled for September, and not for, and then rescheduled to tonight. My point is, it seems to me it could be argued that we prodded Mr. Wall. We gave him the opportunity to come back. He did not take advantage of that opportunity. And what prodded him in the face of the ruling from the FAA, I'm not sure, but I don't know whether you have any comment on that or not.
I think my comment on that is that I think we're mixing apples and oranges. And I would love to tell you what I talked to Mr. Walsh about before the 6-month hearing, but that's attorney-client privilege, and I can't. So,
I understand.
but my understanding of the 6-month period was an indication to Mr. Walsh that you were going to reconsider the restrictions, and whether it wasn't that if you want to come back on the airport, you better come back in 6 months and give us a good reason why. It was, we're going to suspend your privileges here for 6 months, and we're going to revisit that issue in 6 months. And presumably,
if you bring it up with us.
well, I'm not sure that. Wow. So he has to petition for a right to come back on the airport, because that's not in the regulations, as best I can tell, or your
no,
rules.
that's not what I said. We invited him to come back after 6 months.
I understand, but it sounds as though it's a bit of an ad hoc procedure that you're suggesting that is now in place. We're back now. It's now, more than a year later, and I've given you, my best arguments that I have available to me as to why I think he's safe. And safety is the reason why he is being restricted from Nantucket. I believe that safety is not really the issue, I would suggest. It's something else. And so I don't want to litigate this. I really don't. Mr. Walsh doesn't want to litigate this. Again, I believe that the restrictions have been fairly significant. I am sure that Mr. Walsh is going to want to avoid this in the future. So to the extent that you wanted to send a message to him that he should alter his behavior and play nice in the future, I think he's heard that message, and he understands that he's not in power here. You are. So there's not much else I can say to persuade you other than what I already have. He is licensed. He really has an unblemished flying record. That literally 4.5 years in the air of his life.
All right.
And
Okay. Yeah,
Chairman?
I think we're going over some old ground now. Thank you very much for your comments, though. Mr. Rafter?
If I may, and I understand the FAA regulates the flying aspect of it. What we're looking at here too is a general disregard for rules and regulations, both ours and the FAA's. And there's nothing that says if in fact we were to allow Mr. Walsh to operate again, even as a private pilot, that he wouldn't continue to do so. And under various circumstances in different ways, whether it's the non-payment of fees, which he's done in the past, whether it's flying charters without the proper certificates, which we've seen because of the revocation. So it seems as though there's a disregard for rules and regulations, and it's done until he gets caught. And that's the concern I have. We don't have all the means to be able to monitor his activities at all times. And, that just seems to be the MO, that he operates the way he wants until he gets caught.
If I could comment briefly.
Surely.
He, by your definition, he was caught, right? And he has been sanctioned. He's been punished. He has been punished. And it's now 15 months. Is it a lifetime ban? Is it, it was subject to a 6-month review. We're now well beyond a second 6 months, and again, the legal argument's very simple on the arbitrary and capricious. It's arbitrary in the sense that you folks decide whether it's going to be 6 months or 60 years. It's not written down anywhere. There's no warning anywhere that if you do this, the result will be Y. The FAA, as you know, has published sanction guidance tables. If you bust an altitude or you go into restricted airspace, they tell you what's going to happen. You're going to lose your license for X number of days. It's going to be subject to an immediate revocation, whatever it might be. So the pilot knows. He knows. You may find it humorous, but the sanction guidance are there so that the arbitrary and capricious argument is taken off the table. That's why they're there.
If I may, Mr. Chair, it would be extremely difficult for us to determine penalties for such things as urinating on the ramp. We cannot anticipate all of the misgivings that he's going to do.
Mr. Mackey, do you have anything you want to add to the discussion?
No, Mr. Chairman, other than the fact, just to clarify the record on the 6-month issue, Mr. Walsh was previously represented by counsel Yankow, and I believe it was late January 2020, he did reach out to me to set up an opportunity for Mr. Walsh to appear at the 6-month mark, and we exchanged emails, and we had arranged for Mr. Walsh to come to the commission meeting. I think it was on April 14th, 2020, and just said, confirm with the commission your attendance. And we reached out shortly before the meeting and were unable to reach Mr. Walsh's counsel, and needless to say, Mr. Walsh didn't come. So I guess I just, the fact that this has gone on longer than, the 6-month period at which you said we'd check back in with him is certainly not because the commission did not make the opportunity available to him.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Kane and Mr. Walsh for being here. As I said, we are not able to consider this in open session because of the pending litigation, but we will discuss it. And as I said, I will ask the commission to permit us to breach the veil of executive session in order to let you know the outcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So just to be clear, should I be signing off?
Yes, please, if you would.
Okay.
Both
Thank
of you can watch on the YouTube channel if you want to watch the rest of this.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I will as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Back to that later. The pending leases and contracts, Mr. Rafter?
Yes, the first is an operating agreement with Fly the Whale. They're an operator for Blade, and that's a $1,500 business fee. Next is a contract with United Ag and Turf, and that's for $13,970 for a commercial Z-Track. That's a mower that we use to cut around the tie downs and taxiway lights and runway lights. Then we have a contract amendment with Graywall Software, which is also known as Viochi. That's a refund of about $5,400. There was an overcharge there. We have a contract with MHQ, the first one, for $48,553. And that is for a new Ford F-350 pickup truck. It replaces one of our older vehicles. The second is another MHQ contract for $73,291. It says here purchase of a 2020 Ford E350 cutaway van. It's basically a bus. It's replacing one of the buses that we use for operations. We'll be replacing a second one next year. Then we have a contract with McFarland Johnson for $12,050. And that is a task order to do the grant administration for the CARES Act funding. We also have another McFarland Johnson task order for $17,700, and that's for the administration services for the passenger facility charge.
Any questions, comments on those? Is there a motion to approve the pending agreements and contracts as outlined by Mr. Rafter?
So moved.
Second, is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. How do you vote, Ms. Planzer?
Aye.
Mr. Buscarin?
Aye.
Mr. Gasparo?
Aye.
The chair votes aye. The next item is the home rule petition for the capital approval process.
Yes, as you know, Article 94 did pass DATM. I just received, just before this meeting, a request from town manager for some additional detail. They need a clean copy of our reasoning behind the request. So we're going to send that to them, and they'll be forwarding the home rule petition on to the state legislature. Next, do you want me to go into the PFAS investigation?
Please. Can't wait.
So in your packet, we've created a template to summarize some of the PFAS activities. It kind of takes what you've seen on the map and just puts it down in some numbers. And for this particular period ending 10/7 of this year, you can see we've sampled 67 different wells and the various results there. So it just gives you a kind of a snapshot of what's going on. This week, they're installing some of the non-emergency POET systems, which are I believe it's the 12 on, the ones pending on Maddox Sham, the 6 or 5 rather being pending there. So they're being installed this week. We've also included in your packet a handout that was sent as a handout, communication that was sent from a resident of 42 Okerawa Avenue that had their wells tested privately and had results above the DEP threshold, along with a response from our LSP indicating that he did not believe it was the result of airport activities and that the DEP concurred with his findings. So that's in your packet. And we also today had a conversation with FAA compliance, Mr. Pantelli, to brief him on our PFAS program and what our intentions are with the water main to make sure that we're following compliance regulations with regard to use of airport revenue. And he said we're on the right track and didn't have any concerns at this time with it. So we're proceeding with the contract with Wannacomet Water and still working through that. That's a brief summary of some of the PFAS items.
Any questions? Where do we stand? I'm sorry, Mr. Gasparo, just 1 second. Where do we stand on the second stage of this, which is the PFAS plume investigation? Is that still?
I mean, I'll have to ask Noah, but that my recollection is that goes into phase 2, which is, and I don't know when phase 1 gets completed and we start phase 2, but it's all in accordance with our MCP, I believe. Noah, can you explain that a little better?
Yes, thank you. The plume identification is part of what's considered phase 2 work. It happens after phase 1. It doesn't always have to happen after phase 1. Typically, if a regulated party would like to see phase 2 related work advanced, they would work with the DEP to ensure the work is appropriate and would be acceptable. The idea is that much of the phase 2 work, but not all of it, does rely on acceptance of phase 1 reporting by DEP.
So I
So
guess,
where do we actually stand in the process, Mr. Carberg?
We do not have a full task order for it because the scope of that work hasn't been determined. It would
Okay.
depend on the outcome of open sampling.
And will it be next month or will it be several months by your estimate?
It would be at least 2 months, Dan. It would rely on soil sampling, which should take place next week, and the results and interpretation of that results would need to be integrated into phase 1.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Gasparo, you had a question?
Two things. One, thank you for the information related to the FAA. I think that's great news and something that we've been hoping and waiting to hear. Along those lines, where are we at with, studies related to the water main? Is there any little bit more detail you can provide us, or, how much longer and what might we see next, I guess is what I'm asking.
I'm going to ask Noah he's been more on top of that than I have.
So our consultant has identified and retained a local surveyor. They're looking into the Matagasham Valley Road layout issue. The road is not currently in the right of way, looking what's entailed with that and having some preliminary discussions with Natural Heritage on the construction efforts. The cheapest and most efficient construction is a trench and fill for the water main, but much of the path travels through priority habitat, and the division has indicated that they would like to see as much trenchless technology as possible. The general timeframe for design and permitting is 3 to 6 months as of 2 weeks ago. So that would still stand. It is a pretty heavily front-loaded design and permitting effort.
And am I correct, Noah, that we've also been told there is a section where the water main will go that we're going to have to test the soil for PFAS as well?
Quite possibly. As Tom said, yes, part of the water main does pass at least close to a AFFF application site. So we will have to determine the extent of that pending soil sampling results.
Anything else, Mr. Gasparo?
Thank you. I guess all I would say is that if there's any way to avoid the trenchless technology through even potentially some additional studies, to prove that there may not be species of concern just within a mapped area, I think there could be significant cost savings to doing that. And we should certainly keep that in mind. We may, I think there's competing interests where, Natural Heritage may say they want us to do things one way, but if we can do a little bit of extra work to show there is in fact not an adverse effect from doing it the less expensive way, then we want to, I'm sure you're on that, but I think it's important to at least have the whole commission sort of understand and agree to that too. And then so that was with the water main. And then what about at Nobodere Way water main? Are we similarly making some progress there?
We are. I'm about halfway through a draft policy statement for the commission's review. I'm sorry I couldn't have it for you at this meeting. There are a number of items that we need to make sort of final policy determinations on. As you can imagine, each residential site, they're not cookie cutters based off of where the existing well and service entry is, the condition of the plumbing, the availability of the existing water main, and the items that you interrupt on the way of the new service into the house, whether that's a pool, septic field, landscaping, hardscaping, and how that's all treated from the use of airport revenue. We did have some initial indications just today from FAA compliance that would help guide that. But we hope to have a draft for you and hopefully an informal review very shortly.
Thank you. And then my final comment or question is in relation to the correspondence that we received for 42 Monahanses or Orcoar, as well as the LSP. How will that be communicated back to that owner? I mean, will they be sent the letter, the email that we saw today, or, you know, what exactly is going to happen there, I guess?
That's a good question.
I've reached out to my counterparts in the town. My position is that this is a communication that's regulatory in nature for a regulatory development that we don't own. My opinion is this would be better communicated as a town-led effort, and have those conversations with my analog there.
If I may, it seems to me that it's a public document as of this discussion, and shouldn't we just share it?
Yeah,
with the
I
owner
think that's
directly?
true. I agree with you. And my suggestion would be that it be forwarded to the homeowner.
Understood.
Thank you.
I
That's all I
just,
had there. Thanks for all the work on this.
I just am hoping that the town establishes a communication protocol that addresses the rest of the potential issues that may arise too.
If you've had a chance to study that email, it's fairly broad. It presents a fairly broadly brushed picture of possible sources of PFAS contamination other than the airport. And I think Mr. Rafter is right that there.
We'll respond because, you know, this is brought to our attention, but just because PFAS is anywhere on the island doesn't mean it's the airports either.
Well, that's true, but it does mean that there needs to be some kind of defined communication strategy, or they're going to end up spending spending too much time the way
Yeah,
we have on some of these.
We can't afford the time to respond to all those, but we will definitely send it back to the owner.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else on PFAS?
I had one other.
Yes.
It is somewhat a crossover with the budget, but I did just want to mention that I noticed in the budget that management put in a line item for a hold for funds related to replacing the turnout gear once that type of gear is available, and I very much appreciate that.
Yeah. Good point. Thank you.
Correct. Thank you.
All right, moving on to the airport manager contract review. You have the slightly revised version of Mr. Rafter's contract that was previously approved. Town council has made a couple of a few cosmetic changes to it, but I have incorporated two substantive changes, which I would like to propose to you for consideration. These are both in the fringe benefits section on page 4. One of them is for under the previous version of the contract, the last edition. Mr. Rafter received a housing allowance of $1,500 per month. I am proposing that be increased to $2,000 per month. And I am also proposing that the amount payable into a deferred compensation plan on Mr. Rafter's behalf be increased from $3,000 a year to $5,000 a year. These I am suggesting, because in conversations with the recruiting firm that found us Mr. Rafter, it appears that he is at the very low end of the scale of people similarly situated in the airport business, and it seems appropriate at this point to do something of this sort for him. It's a token more than anything else, but I think it's important. And obviously, I would welcome comments from the other members of the commission.
I support this. I think it's a great idea. I didn't realize the housing allowance was so low. I think that's a modest increase. I support that, plus the retirement benefit.
As
Thank you,
do
Ms.
I.
Blunt.
Completely support that.
All right, are there any other comments on the contract? Is there a motion to approve the manager's contract effective for 3 years beginning July 1, 2020?
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. How do you vote, Ms. Planter?
Aye.
Mr. Buscarin?
Aye.
Mr. Gasparo?
Aye.
The chair votes aye. Thank you, Tom. Keep up the good work.
Thank you all.
Declaration of surplus property on Bunker Road.
Yes, I'm going to ask Katie to share the screen and bring up the map. There's a parcel behind Toscana property that they've expressed interest in, but we have to put out publicly. And it's, you may recall, I gave you a little bit of a briefing on this before. We talked to Andrew and Leslie at the Plus Department. The town GIS indicates a larger piece than it actually is. It indicates it being owned by the electric company when in fact it's a airport property. There's also an emergency access that is required between the electric company parcel and our parcel, as well as a green belt set off that is in our MCD. So we're having this surveyed and staked out. We had an appraisal done, and we're going to be developing the RFP. There may be limited access because on the MCD it shows an access point off of Matacasham Valley Road through the green belt, which if you look at it's off the map, but it's at the very bottom just about. So we're not sure if that can be moved or not. So the language in the RFP will reflect that it requires, that it has limited access, but may require approval for any access to the site off Matacasham Valley Road. So the parcel in yellow is what we are looking to put out as an RFP. And you can see the gray line is the emergency access that's required. And then the cutoff at the top is the distance of that green belt that's required to Matacasham Valley. So this is the first step where we have to declare the surplus property, and then we'll issue the RFP. As I said, we're having that surveyed and we had it appraised, and we'll put out the RFP once the declaration of surplus property goes through.
Any questions? Is there a motion to approve this declaration of surplus property?
I make a motion to approve this declaration of surplus property.
Thank you. Is there a second? Did somebody second?
Seconded.
Thank you, Mr. Buscarin. How do you vote, Ms. Planser?
Aye.
Mr. Buscarin?
Aye.
Mr. Gasparo?
Aye.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I also did want to extend my thanks for having this surveyed, and we've done the lease areas different ways, and I think this really shows how important it is for the lease areas to have proper surveys.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Along with the rest of the island, right?
Yeah, well, this is the land we're managing, though, and
Right.
this,
Yeah, you're right. I don't mean to
way to
make
get
light
it
of your
right.
comment. I'm sorry. All right, moving along to the finance heading. Lease
So-
payment. abatement or deferment? Is there any motion on that?
Well, that relates to the crosswinds, and it's going to require an amendment to their agreement because we're also looking for some language change. So legal's finalizing that. We have a call with them tomorrow, and then we'll present it back to crosswinds, and I would hope to have this for you by next meeting. Next,
Fuel revolver.
I'm sorry.
The fuel revolver.
Yes, the fuel revolver. You may recall I asked to put it on the radar because of the uncertainty and the COVID issues and all the other things. Jamie looked at the fuel revolver. It's currently at $2 million, and there's a handout in your packet that I can walk through how she's coming up with the recommendation, and she does very good work and is very detailed with this. She looked at the average for first quarter gallons sold from 2015 through 2020, and it was 69% of the total gallons sold for the year. And FY21, we're at 896,000 gallons. So the projected total for FY91 total year would be just under 1.3 million, about 1,299,000. We then took into consideration the COVID impact, and we're estimating about a 15% reduction or deduction in sales. So that reduced it by 194,878, bringing it down to the projected total of 1,104,000 gallons to be sold. At the average price of $4.15, that would result in an anticipated fuel revenue of $4.5 million. Now, you may recall that the cap on the fuel revolver is a cap on both expense and on revenue. So the objective here is to ensure that we have sufficient enough money to buy the fuel we need to make the money that we live off of. So the anticipated fuel expenditures for FY21 are $2.2 million. Looking at the current budget, the fuel revolver again is $2 million existing with an overflow into the operating of $458,000 or total projected revenue in the budget of 2.458. What we're proposing is a fuel cap of 3.5 million with an overflow into operating of 1,082,000. Total revenue of $4.58 million, which again is based on the average fuel price of $4.15. So that would leave us projected remaining in the fuel balance, in the fuel revolver of 1.2 million. So we'd like to request permission to raise the fuel revolver cap from 2 million to 3.5 million. And if the commission approves this, we would also have to get the finance committee and select board approval to increase it. You may recall we can go through this process to increase, to decrease the cap, we would have to go to an annual town meeting. So with your permission, we'd like to proceed with requesting to raise the cap to 3.5 million.
Are there any questions on this topic? Is there a motion to approve raising the fuel revolver cap to $3.5 million?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. How do you vote, Ms. Planzer?
Aye.
Mr. Buscarin?
Aye.
Mr. Gasparo?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. You want to talk about the 2022 budget, Mr.
Yes,
Rafter?
I just want to discuss the schedule a little bit here. Jamie is off this week, but next week she'll be working on the budget. She's already started, but she's going to be finalizing the draft. She had just gone through the audit last week, which I believe went very well.
Excuse me, Mr. Rafter, there are two people who have joined us who are actually going to be with us for the executive session. One of them is Paul Napoli of NSPR Law, and the other, is she your colleague, Mr. Napoli?
She is. She's my associate. Thank you, Chairman. If you'd like us to log off and sign back in, or we could just be quiet.
It's up to you. You can stay.
So Dan,
Michelle
this
Green is
not-
also, of,
Sorry, Chairman, this is not the executive session link. We will
I know,
not
we
be
have to,
using-
they'll have to sign off and get
They'll have
back
to
on.
sign off and sign back into the link anyways, but
Okay, that's what
Well,
we'll do.
you're welcome to stay. Who else is on? There's another person on the phone.
I think that's Michelle on the phone, but I
No,
will.
she's up on the screen. The number 631-827-2169.
I believe she dialed in with her phone and is on.
I'm on video call.
Oh, okay. So I don't know 631.
I'm not sure.
So we will, and I apologize for interrupting. We will go on the executive session link.
Okay, that's fine.
Well-
It'll probably be another 15, 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay, no worries.
Okay, thank you.
Speak to you soon.
All right, thank you. Well, the telephone participant has disappeared too, so.
So,
Okay,
as I was saying, we had the audit last week. It appeared to go very well, but the one thing that they were interested in was the expenses in professional services, and I explained to them what PFAS was. They were not familiar with PFAS, so they became familiar with it and said they would most likely have, many more interactions with that and some of their other accounts. So Jamie's going to be back next week. We'd like to propose having a draft to the commission for the November meeting with request for final approval at the December meeting. We have the day after the commission meeting in December, we have a meeting set up with the town manager. And right after that is when Jamie goes on maternity leave. So I apologize, it's a little bit of a rush, but we want to try to get that wrapped up. So we will have a draft to you for the November meeting, seeking approval in December. Just wanted to make sure everybody's aware of that schedule. The FY22 capital plan is in your packet. We had to present this. Again, this was a very, I don't want to say rushed, but the schedule changed quickly. And we presented this to the capital committee. Also in the packet is a revised and updated CIP, which is based on FAA feedback. We had an FAA CIP meeting. We proposed some projects. They came back after an internal meeting, which apparently went very well for us, where they agreed to program some significant discretionary funds. And then they gave us some different years though. So they moved the projects around a year or two in some of the cases, but that final CIP is what FAA has basically programmed on a national level for this airport, which is pretty significant. Any questions before I go on to my manager's report?
do you need approval for the Capcom, ratification of the Capcom?
I don't, I guess so, Dan, because that would be the capital budget. So yes.
Yeah. Does anybody have any questions about the capital budget? Don't go away, Mr. Buscarin. We're about to take a vote. All right, we'll wait till he comes back to do that. Go ahead. Go ahead with the manager. Oh, there you are. There you are. You're back. Okay. Are there any questions on the capital budget? Well, I'll entertain a motion to ratify the capital budget as presented to the Capital Projects Committee.
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. How do you vote, Ms. Planzer?
Aye.
Mr. Buscarin?
Aye.
Mr. Gasparo?
Aye.
And the chair votes aye.
Dan, if I may, I forgot to mention, I just want everybody to know what was said about Jamie and staff. The town has a fairly arduous process for preparing the documents required for these capital requests. And Mr. Sears from the town wrote back to Jamie and said that her work is the gold standard for what they try to get the other departments to do. So Jamie and the staff have done a great job in preparing all that information. Okay, projects.
Please extend to her our thanks.
I certainly will. Thank you. To the capital, Security project phase 2. Pre-construction meeting was held last week. Contractor anticipates beginning that work in early November. We're fortunate that we have the same team back in place, so that'll work well. There is a bit of trenching and outdoor work that's a little different too, and some fence work. But we had FA involved in construction safety plan, and that's been approved, so that's going well. The EAEIS, there are various chapters that are coming out. In fact, I think we just got 2 of them today. And we can, it's a tight time frame for approval. So if you'd like, we can send it to all of the commissioners, or as soon as we can, digest what we have, or anyone that's interested, whatever the chair's pleasure is there. Because again, there's going to be a lot of documents in the next couple of weeks, is my understanding. And then what we have to do is we're going to be seeking approval at the November meeting, so that this can get back in sync with the schedule of the AIP grant requests. So I didn't want to, spring it on the commission on November and say, hey, we need your approval.
Is it worth asking the environmental subcommittee to convene and take a look at this stuff? Mr. Gasparo, what's your thought on that?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And I believe there's also the pending EIR. We can look at that too. That can get all wrapped up.
These are the chapters as part of that. That's what
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I didn't realize.
So, should we just forward these on to the members of that subcommittee?
Ms. Planzer, would you like them as well?
Yes.
Okay, we'll forward it out to everyone.
Okay.
Again, as soon as we've had a chance, I haven't even had a chance to look at it, so we'll get it out to you.
And Mr. Gasparo, you'll coordinate with Ms. Perales on a meeting date.
And Mr. Boscarin, yes.
And Mr. Boscarin, yes. Okay, thank
On
you.
the fuel farm, filed electrical subbids are now due on October 21st, with general contractor bids due on the 28th. We had to do a little bit of a redesign. The nozzles for the fire suppression were supposed to be UL listed by now. They weren't, so they had to tweak the design a little bit to get the approved nozzles in there. Taxiway Echo, moving along well. Contractor is looking to move into phase 2 later this week or early next week. There's a minor incident day 1 of the project where a aircraft taxied into the barricades and into the work project, but no significant damage or injury, so that's a good thing. The drainage plan, we're hoping to get that soon. Most of that work's been done. We've commented on. I got to ping them as to when we're going to get it. The ALP geometry change, we're reviewing a proposed task order and fee from MJ. Water main we discussed earlier. On the RFP bid status, we put out the request for expression of interest again for the hangar 8, which is a freight hangar, and there was an open-ended one previously. We put a deadline on that. We're not seeing any initial interest, so we're looking into other potential opportunities for that facility. The POET system supply, we didn't cover this under PFAS, but the non-emergency installation and house doctor bids went out the second time. We received no bids, and legal is discussing with the Attorney General what the alternatives may be. We had a conversation with Brian Turbot to see what our alternatives are and see how we can get somebody to put a bid in on that. I mentioned the RFP for Bunker Road. Car rental agreements, they expire at the end of this year, and we initially were going to issue an RFP. There is some allowance in there for us to continue them, and because of some challenges that we're facing with trying to work with the town on looking at medallions and the availability for a new entrant, we're going to be looking at extending them for 1 more year, the existing operators. And hangar development, we're working on a lease with Mr. Turner, but subsequently, after we had issued and closed the request for expression of interest, we had 2 additional parties expressed interest in hangar development. And whether they join with Mr. Turner or we deal with them individually, we're going to be working with legal on how we can approach that. But I think they are all signs, and in discussing with some of these folks, there's signs that people are going to be either having more of a commitment year round to the island, or at least certainly staying longer. If they want to build hangars or looking to store their airplanes. So that's an interesting thing, which leads me right into my next thing in the operations air service update. JetBlue has informed us that they'll continue service through the end of December with between 3 and 4 flights a week to JFK. And we're working through a number of impacts that has. The biggest right now is the impact on the construction of taxiway Echo. We had initially planned on phase 2, JetBlue would not be operating. So now we're coming up with some creative ways where they can operate around the construction. Some of the impacts on the facility, the de-icing, the snow removal, all different aspects of it that we have to be aware of. Southern Airways also has informed us that they're going to be going year-round, and they'll be servicing Hyannis, Providence, Norwood, New Bedford. They're very happy with the summer numbers they saw, so they want to stay year-round. And interestingly enough, you'll see in the statistics, the operations on the private aircraft portion of our operation are up about 40% for September. However, the revenue is down about 4%. So what we're seeing are more aircraft, more operations, but less fuel being sold, and it could be because of the short stage lengths and some other reasons. We're also working on looking at the APU violations and trying to explore ways to identify the frequent and flagrant violators and how we can develop a method to obtain their compliance. So we're looking into that. Any questions before I go into statistics? Okay, hearing none. Operations continue to drop to down 37.35 over last August, down 40.8 for the year. Again, Southwest ramp GA ops are up almost, says for August for 10%, but as I said, September 40%. Employments were down in the commercial side 64.3 over last August and 65.1 for year to date. Cape Air saw a 50% decrease in employments. United was down 86%. Delta down 39%, JetBlue down 83%, Nantucket Air was up 11%, Tradewind was up 6%, American down 37%, Southern saw a 13% increase. The Boston market, Cape Air had a 53% decrease and JetBlue had a 88% decrease. Overall, Boston was down 73% or 5,434 passengers. So COVID has hit the commercial side significantly. Charlotte American service was down only 19%. Washington National, JetBlue was down 68% or 695 passengers, and American was down 29% or 1,038. Overall, DCA was down 38%. New Bedford traffic down 69. Cape Air White Plains and employments were down 24% or 50 packs. The Hyannis market for August was actually up. Cape Air was up 39%, Nantucket Air was up 11%, Southern began the route and carried 93 passengers. Overall, Hyannis market was up 21% or 210 passengers, so that's interesting. On the Washington Dulles, United flew this route this year for the first time, carried 513 passengers at a 64% load factor. The JFK market, JetBlue was down 81% or 6,200 passengers. LaGuardia, American down 72, Delta down 39, JetBlue down 76, overall market down 69%, or 3,822 passengers. Vineyard traffic down 39%. Boy, I'm getting tired of saying down. Norwood service down 1% or 1 passenger. Providence saw a 26% decrease. So we got hit very hard this season in the commercial service. The Jet A gallons sold for August were down 20%. Year to date, they're down 17.5. And for September, they're up just slightly, about 0.4%. Avgas down 21, almost 22% for August. 28% year-to-date. September, they're down 5.25. Freight for August was down 2.82 over last August, and year-to-date up 3.07. And noise complaints were down from 38 last year to 27 this year. One other note on the personnel side of the house, we have hired a new FBO supervisor. He begins the 19th of this month. His name is Mr. Eddie O'Keefe. Has a background in the restaurant field, but significant management experience in the New York area, where he's managed up to 30 people. So looking forward to having him start on the scene on the 19th. And that's the end of my report.
Thank you, Mr. Rafter. First of all, I'm going to ask that the YouTube chat channel be open now for people to make comments. And remember, please, if you do want to make a comment, you need to refresh your browser after the chat channel is opened. Mr. Rafter, I have a couple of questions on your report. One relates to, I didn't see anything in here on the Philadelphia market or the Charlotte market.
I had Charlotte. Philadelphia was not served this year because of COVID.
No, didn't American?
They initially announced it, but I don't think they flew it. No, do you? That's my recollection, because I don't remember seeing any Philadelphia numbers.
Let me look into that and report out.
Charlotte was down 19% on American.
It's interesting because I had a conversation with somebody who has bought a house here, who lives in Philadelphia, who said he'd worked with Alan Warden and the Nantucket Data Project to feed numbers to American for the Philadelphia service.
Yeah, and we were successful in getting that, and they announced it, and then COVID hit. So I don't recall them flying any service to Philadelphia. Trust me, that's one I'd be on the lookout for too.
Yeah. It was once a week, right? I think it was the way it was supposed to be.
Saturdays.
Saturdays, yeah. The other thing is, do you want to bring us up to date on freight service?
Oh, yes. So Cape Air is back in the freight business. We're working out the paperwork. We've agreed in concept, and we're just finalizing an amendment legal to allow them to do the freight through the terminal. I don't have any indicator just yet, but their monthly reports they submit to Jamie, she's updating those. So I don't know how well it's going or what it's doing just yet, but
They
they
just announced that they're starting it.
Yes.
This is the last few days. Okay, any other questions? Any commissioners' comments? Anybody? Hearing none, are you watching the YouTube channel, Mr. Gasparo? I'm sorry, you're muted. You're muted.
Give me 1 second.
Okay.
Just Bobby saying hello.
Hi, Bob.
Hearing none, are you watching the YouTube channel, Mr. Gasparo? Sorry, you're muted.
It's a delay.
Oh,
okay.
Is that better?
All right, well then, there's still nothing there, Mr.
Nope.
Gasparo. Then you can cut off the chat feature. Thank you. I will entertain a motion to go into executive session under General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 21A, to review for release executive session minutes as enumerated, and the minutes of the executive session of September 8th, 2020 to be reviewed and for possible release. B, under clause 3, to discuss strategy with respect to the litigation regarding the Gatto claim where the chair has determined that an open session may have detrimental effect on the litigating position of the Airport Commission. Under clause 3, to discuss strategy with respect to the litigation regarding Walsh where the chair has determined that an open session may have detrimental effect on the litigating position of the Airport Commission. Under clause 3, to discuss strategy with respect respect to collective bargaining where the chair has determined that an open session may have a detrimental effect on the bargaining position of the Airport Commission. Under clause 3, to discuss strategy with respect to pursuing legal claims against manufacturer of polyfluoroalkyl substances where the chair has determined an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the litigating position of the Airport Commission. And under clause 3, to discuss strategy with respect to potential legal claims against the airport for the polyfluoroalkyl substances, PFAS, where the chair has determined an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the litigating position of the Airport Commission. Is there such a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr.
Second.
Buscarin. You second, Mr. Gasparo?
Do.
Thank you. How do you vote, Ms. Plancer?
Aye.
Mr. Buscarin,
Aye.
Mr. Gasparo,
Aye.
and the chair votes aye. You all have a link in a email that Katie sent out not too long before the meeting for the executive session. So we'll all leave here and go to that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.